Hello, my name is Rosie Taylor and I am Curatorial Specialist at the BFI National Archive and co-curator of Southwest Silence. I am here today as part of the Cinema Rediscovered event Collecting Now with my esteemed colleagues Dylan Cave, Patrick Russell, Lisa Kerrigan and Will Massa to talk about contemporary collecting at the BFI National Archive of online video content, television and VR. First of all, we're going to watch a video that my colleagues have put together talking about their specialist areas of collecting, and then we will regroup back here to have a discussion and a Q&A, which you can participate in yourselves to talk more in depth about these areas. So enjoy the video.
Hello and welcome to this Cinema Rediscovered event about the BFI National Archive and collecting contemporary works. My name is Dylan Cave and I'm the Collections Development Manager at the BFI National Archive. My role is to assist curators with acquisition decisions and general collections development work. In a moment, I will introduce some of my curatorial colleagues who will be discussing various aspects about collecting contemporary works in all of its guises. But first, by means of introduction, I've been asked to say a word or two about how the BFI approaches collecting in general to help frame and give context to our contemporary collecting activity. So here goes. The BFI National Archive conserves and preserves one of the world's largest collections of film, television and associated special collections, ranging from Burt Acres' The Derby, one of the earliest known British films, through The Open Road, and The Magic Box, both of which are showing as part of Cinema Rediscovered, to contemporary works such as Ben Shorrock's Limbo, Aleem Khan's After Love, Derry Girls television, or kids' TV shows like The World According to Grandpa, all of which are available and kind of part of our contemporary viewing culture at the moment. We hold an extensive international collection of films, including one of the world's most important collections of silent cinema, most of which is held uniquely by the BFI. We are leaders in collecting British film, television and video, in innovative preservation and restoration, and in providing public access to screen history. One of the BFI's core functions, as enshrined in our Royal Charter, is to establish, care for and develop collections reflecting the moving image history and heritage of our United Kingdom. Other national collections may acquire film and moving images, but do so for their own purposes and collecting context. For example, the Imperial War Museum does collect film and moving images, but it's around images of conflict. The BFI has its subject, the art, the history and impact of British film, television and the moving image. Our ultimate goal is to ensure that work that has been selected for the National Collection is still preserved in 50, 100 years' time and beyond. We are the National Television Archive, and my colleague Lisa will expand a little bit more on our role there. Our special collections include posters, publicity materials, production designs, unpublished scripts, and over 1.4 million photographic prints. We hold individual collections from film and television makers, including David Lean, Gurinder Chadha, Michael Powell, Carol Reed, and Derek Jarman. 46,000 books are held in the BFI Rubin Library. Wherever possible, we aim to collect the highest resolution and best quality materials available. For feature films, for example, this would usually be 35mm negatives for work shot or presented on film, or a digital cinema distribution master for films that are presented digitally. Key to the future of our collection is understanding the technical details of how and what to collect. Our collecting priorities are informed by the BFI National Archive collection policy and the collection development plan, which all relate to current BFI strategy. The collection policy, which is currently being updated, is a statement of our collecting ambition, the scope of our collecting, and our policies towards acquisition, documentation and data management, collection care, and access. It aligns with various professional standards, guidance and ethics which inform the activity and performance of many UK national collections, and indeed many international institutions too. The Collections Development Plan expands on the ambitions stated in the BFS strategy and the collection policy, setting out the collecting priorities over a defined period and is subject to annual review. Within this framework, the BFI National Archives curators research and develop the national collection. Taking their lead from the BFI collection policy, they use their deep knowledge of contemporary and historic production to inform the titles that they select to acquire for acquisition and preservation. Diversity is central to the decisions made when selecting work for acquisition. This includes addressing historic omissions and prioritising contemporary work by and about people from the greatest diversity of backgrounds. Our process is that archive selection and acquisition decisions are taken within a committee meeting structure that reviews curatorial recommendations against organisation accountability. Proposed acquisitions are assessed using documentation, which describes the collection on offer, sets out the cultural justification within the overall collecting policy, considers the resources for preserving, and identifies any extraordinary issues, such as the physical condition, if there's content sensitivity, or queries about provenance. Approved acquisitions are secured with acquisition agreements, which make clear the nature of donation, which is a transfer of physical ownership, physical legal title in the material from the donor to the BFI, and some defined permitted uses, which supports our BFI access objectives. An acquisition is complete when physical material is fully examined and prepared for long-term preservation in the relevant vaults. For digital works, acquisition means the content is ingested into our digital preservation infrastructure, and in all cases, the works are described in our collections information database. So that's just a kind of a brief overview of, by means of an introduction to what we mean by kind of acquisition and collection within the BFI National Archive. I'm now going to hand over via the miracle of editing to my colleagues in curatorial who will discuss different aspects of contemporary collecting in slightly more detail. First up will be Patrick Russell, who is our Senior Curator of Non Fiction and is presenting more of the cultural case for the BFI National Archive collecting contemporary works. Then we have Lisa Kerrigan, our Senior Curator of Television, who's going to talk about how we collect television. And we finish with Will Massa, who is our Curator of Contemporary Fiction, who will introduce our ambition to acquire interactive and immersive works, and we'll talk a little bit about the challenges that brings as well. So with no further ado, over to Patrick.
Hi, here's a clip from a 1919 film distributed during the influenza epidemic, probably the first British government-sponsored health information film. Now, here's a 1945 film, also a health advice film. By the World War II era, government was commissioning huge numbers of information films for cinema and later for TV. Virtual prizes to any of you who can identify this fun film's frontman.
Hi, stop it, you. Stop it, stop it. Come here, what do you think you're up to? You've probably infected thousands of people already. What do you think this is for? Yes, that's all right, but here's another way of using your handkerchief. Now sneeze. Come on. All right, never mind. Close your eyes. Now, handkerchief. Sneeze. Sneeze, handkerchief. Got it? Fine. Understand? Handkerchief, sneeze. See what I mean? That's the idea. Fine. Now you can carry on.
Gold Star goes to all who identified Richard Massingham, a familiar face to 1940s cinema goers, regarded today as a master of the art of applying humour and cinematic technique to delivering public messaging. The social resonance of these two films today is obvious, given the year we've all been living through, but they also resonate with today's filmmaking. That's what makes them relevant to the topic of collecting contemporary work. At the time, neither film was considered that noteworthy. You won't find much contemporary writing about them, or them being championed by cultural commentators. They were part of the furniture. But what in its moment appears ephemeral later gets to coin a phrase, rediscovered, as social history and as screen history, whether the realisation that the 1919 film was pioneering in terms of use of film for health, or Richard Massingham becoming a revered cult figure. But rediscovery is only possible if the films survive. In 1919 and 1945, precious few gave any thought to whether these ones would, or should, or how that might happen. Both might not have survived, many others didn't. Now, here's some 2020 film. First, brief clips from some coronavirus public information films made not for cinema, but for social media.
Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely.
As winter approaches, we'll be spending more time indoors. This will increase the risk of coronavirus spreading. The following reconstructions of everyday environments show why washing hands regularly, wearing a face covering, and keeping at least 2 meters apart is vital in controlling the spread. Coronavirus can live for more than 24 hours indoors. You could pick up or pass on the virus by touching a contaminated surface.
Official films are just a fraction of the COVID canon of moving images. Thousands of videos have circulated online. Satires, music videos, video diaries, even home exercise instructionals. Today's Massingham might just be Joe Wicks, using filmmaking to keep us in shape in lockdown. But these films aren't considered that noteworthy. Some get 15 minutes of fame, a flurry of attention on Twitter one day, forgotten the next. They're part of the furniture. But what in our moment appears ephemeral may get rediscovered as social history or as screen history. That's why contemporary collecting is important, though it's also really hard. A current project of the BFI National Archive, Britain on Lockdown, asks the public to nominate online videos they've enjoyed or been affected by during these times. We're currently ploughing through those suggestions to arrive at a list of 100 films we'll seek to bring in for preservation, creating a permanent snapshot of how film online interacted with our plague year. Look up BFI Britain on Lockdown online and you'll find lots of information, and it's not too late to nominate your favourites. But on the challenges, and going beyond COVID films here, first there's the problem of mind-blowing scale. Thanks to the digital revolution, there's more film being made in a month or a week, maybe even a day, than in any given year of the analogue era. As the scale with which we have to grapple has gone exponentially up, the resources of the screen archive sector have gone down. Just keeping abreast of content is kind of impossible. Following through to archive any of it, we need legal agreements with every single creator or donor. That takes time. It's even more difficult to try to access films at the best quality. And beyond all that, a big clock is ticking. Digits are, in their way, at every bit as great a risk of loss as the celluloid of 1919 or 1945, maybe more so. But we're on the case, and even with resource challenges, well placed to pursue it. We have a brilliant infrastructure for preserving digital films securely, and we're in the right cultural place to make those connections between films of the past, whether made for cinema or TV, and the films of today, made for cinema, TV, or online. There are such strong narrative threads running from the late 19th century to the early 21st, the epic, intricate story of the most powerful medium our world has known. We do need your support, the community that loves film, support for our preserving not just the past, but also the present for the future. Thanks, and see you soon.
The BFI has an enormous television collection. It numbers around 800,000 programmes, which doesn't include our current off-air recording operation. So we collect television programmes in two ways. Firstly, we record television off-air. So that means programmes as they're broadcast with all the ads and trailers, and the voiceovers come on over the credits as well. The second way that we collect is by receiving broadcast standard files from broadcasting companies. So that's programmes as they're delivered to broadcasters, finished edits, ready to be played out on whichever channel they're going to be broadcast on. We work in partnership with broadcasters. The BBC maintains their own archive, though we do record BBC channels off-air for access purposes. But we are the designated National Television Archive, and we're supported in our work by the other public service broadcasters, namely ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. We collect their work and preserve it as part of the national collection. So part of our work that involves off-air recording, in that area of work, we record 16 channels all day, every day. We've been doing this since around 2016. And those channels are the main Freeview channels associated with the public service broadcasters I mentioned, so the BBC, ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. I think off-air recording is always interesting and historically valuable, but particularly for what we've been experiencing in the last 16 months during the pandemic. The fact that the breaking news broadcasts and the daily COVID updates, all the changes to the TV schedules that we've experienced, and the way in which television has reacted to the crisis by producing programmes in different ways. All of that has been recorded for the archive and is still being recorded now as it continues to unfold. The second way in which we collect programmes is determined by selection. So from all the programmes that are broadcast by the channels who support us and work in partnership with us, we select a limited number of those programmes to acquire in broadcast quality file formats. So that's just a higher quality than the way in which we do off-air recording. Our collections policy states that we select television that best demonstrates the art, history and impact of British television making. So what does that mean? Well, in the selections that I make for this process, what I want to achieve is a balance between flagship drama, comedy, non-fiction, and impactful programmes which reflect the cultural landscape. We try to cover a range of genres to reflect the output and quality of a channel. So that means game shows as well as current affairs and children's programming as well, of course. It's always helpful to talk about specifics rather than policies. So here's a small selection from the programmes I've acquired in this way over the last 12 months. 63 Up from ITV, the latest instalment in the seminal documentary series by Michael Apted. Time Wasters Series 2 from ITV2. That's a relatively underappreciated time travel comedy series. The 2019 ITV election debate. It seems like a long time ago now, but it's not so long really. From Channel 4, the second series of Stathlet's Flats. Shane Meadows' The Virtues, also from Channel 4. The Diary of My Broken Vagina. This is a comedy short from All 4, Channel 4's on-demand service. Where possible, I try to collect online material that's also produced by our partner broadcasters, and Channel 4 do several comedy shorts each year, some of which are then turned into TV series. This one is from 2019, as all of these programmes are. From Channel 5, we collected Critical Condition, which was a terrific medical documentary series, and also a selection of episodes of Peppa Pig, who's obviously a hugely important figure. These are just 8 titles from over 250 programmes which are collected in this way each year. Peppa Pig also brings me on to another recent collecting activity, which is the acquisition of programmes made in association with the BFI Young Audiences Content Fund. And that's a government-funded initiative to help develop programming for children and young audiences. Most recently, we've acquired Teen First Dates, which went out on E4, Sally Mally, which was made for S4C, and Kidversation, which was made for Sky Kids. I do hope that in future we can expand our current television acquisitions to include more cable, satellite and on-demand programming. But as I hope I've explained here, our contemporary television collection is already growing every single minute of the day.
Hello, Cinema Rediscovered. I'm here to talk to you about virtual reality and the BFI National Archive. The BFI's Royal Charter requires us to care for and develop collections that reflect the moving image history and heritage of our United Kingdom. The BFI received that charter in 1983, and sitting here almost 40 years later, it's fair to say that it would have been hard to envisage all the different types of moving image that could be included in that category. We're in a bit of a wild garden at the moment, but one of the forms that has been of particular interest to me, and to the film world in general, is virtual reality or VR. Headset VR has actually been around since the late 1950s, early 1960s, but what I'm talking about here is the latest wave, which started in around 2015 with major investment into the technology from companies like Facebook and Samsung. And around the same time, VR projects started to pop up in dedicated sections at film festivals like Sundance, Cannes and Venice, and there was lots of excitement as big-name filmmakers like Catherine Bigelow and Alfonso Cuarón embraced the medium across both fiction and documentary. Soon, more and more filmmakers and production companies were experimenting, envisaging VR as another string to their creative bows. The UK was no exception, and although VR hasn't quite become a household fixture in the way that the investors hoped, it is certainly a firm presence in our wider audiovisual ecosystem, reflective of both national creativity and identity. Which means that we at the Archive want it to be a presence in the National Archive. But how to approach collecting these kinds of works to make sure they're well looked after and available for future generations, two of our primary considerations for the objects that we look after at the Archive? Well, not easily is the short answer. VR throws up some unique challenges where acquisition is concerned. There's still a lack of technological standardization across the industry, so VR projects still come in all shapes and sizes. Many projects are contingent on proprietary software, specific drivers, games engines or hardware, all of which are subject to rapid obsolescence. For example, Oculus has issued at least 5 different types of headset in the last 5 years, and they're not the only company out there manufacturing hardware. Works might also exist in multiple versions, which we call manifestations, using different delivery platforms every time. But we like a challenge at the BFI National Archive. So in 2018, we embarked on an experimental pilot project to look into some of these issues. We selected 2 works that represented different approaches to VR. The first was called In the Eyes of the Animal by creative studio Marshmallow Laser Feast. It's a VFX-generated experience in which participants traverse a forest floor in the form of various animals. The other project was Notes to My Father, a 360-degree video documentary by Jaisha Patel that looks at child trafficking in India. We knew almost immediately that we'd need to work closely with the makers in each case to get a thorough understanding of the technologies involved and how the projects were put together. But we also wanted to get to the bottom of some more philosophical questions where archive and archive practice is concerned. For example, if a project is made up of many assets and we can only commit to storing some of those assets, does it still represent the original project? Or if a project relies on props because it has an overlap with theatre in some way, and we can't collect those props, how much does that undermine the artist's original intention, particularly if we try to recreate the experience for audiences in 5, 10 or 15 years? If there are multiple versions of a work, and we can only commit to one, then which should we choose, and why? One example of this is the specialised helmets that Marshmallow Laserfeast created when the project debuted back in 2015. These fabulous, mossy helmets are beyond the scope of the BFI's collection policy, but represent an important part of how the project was experienced. We don't want to lose that level of detail in our documentation, and so we plan to collect as much surrounding material, or ephemera, that is generated throughout the course of a project as is possible. That would include things like stills, story maps, visual designs, filmed walkthroughs, and even README documents written by creators to describe the life cycle of a work in their own words. These materials might sit along the files we acquire, so at the very least researchers of the future can understand what the great 21st century VR boom looked like, even if the materials they would access would be of a 2D variety. We're very much still in an R&D phase, a phase I like to describe as best endeavour collecting. We know these types of projects are precarious, and that in many ways filmmakers are not able to count on the kind of digital preservation infrastructure that we've developed at the archive. We're not able to preserve virtual reality projects in the fullest sense yet, nor are we able to guarantee access to them down the line, but we are working, in the short term at least, to find a middle ground between the expectations of producers on the one hand and our current capabilities at the archive on the other. And we're not alone in this endeavour. We're collaborating out in the open, with our peers from other national collecting organisations like the V&A and Tate, who are facing a number of similar challenges within their own institutions and with creative communities when it comes to complex digital objects. It's a great challenge to have, but one that will most likely be solved through ongoing collaboration, research, and R&D. Either way, to not have VR represented within the national collection would be a great omission. So hopefully we can build on our pilot and move towards a more comprehensive strategy for VR and its moving image cousins over the coming years. Thank you.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I should be joined in a minute by my colleagues from the BFI. That was a really fascinating video, so I'd like to thank you all for participating in that and also for joining me today for this Q&A. Please, just to everybody watching, do submit your questions into the chat and we'll get through as many of them as we can. But I'd like to actually start off by asking a couple of questions of my own. It's very clear from what you guys were talking about that there's obviously a vast amount of content to select from in your areas. So I wondered if you would mind talking a little bit on a more granular level about what the specifics are which help you make those collecting decisions. Kind of what are some of the criteria and factors which make you choose one video or one program or one VR project over another. Dylan, if I could start with you to talk about collecting generally at the archive within that context, and then I guess we'll move around in video order, so go Patrick, Lisa, and then Will.
Sure. So basically, I mean, actually, I think what's really behind your question, I should defer to my curatorial colleagues because they are the ones that take the lead in that kind of cultural justification argument. But I think, as I was saying in the introduction piece there, we kind of have a meeting structure whereby curators kind of form their recommendations about material that they would like to bring into the collection, and we discuss it kind of in the round where we see that cultural justification fitting in with both our general kind of collection policy, but also the kind of more immediate plans that we have for the collecting over the next year or two, which is what we decide and what we kind of build into our kind of collections development plan. I mean, that's the framework. Are you looking for more kind of specific question, kind of answer around how you, for that whole kind of idea of how you frame one object over another? I think I might kind of defer to my colleagues on that one.
Okay, then. Right, then, well, Patrick.
Hi. I mean, I think in some ways the sort of the universal principles that the archive has been applying since 1935, when the archive was first founded, still apply today. Namely, that we try within any given area, and as people have gathered from the video, that the given areas are many and varied, from kind of feature film through to television through to multiple areas of other types of screen practice. Within any given area, we try to collect what are the individually significant works within those areas. the things that stand out for their artistry, for what they have contributed to the history of moving image, or for the kind of impact that they've had on audiences. But we also try, beyond those individually significant works, to try to collect the things that, whilst they may not be individually significant, are highly representative of something or other, whether that's trends in moving image, whether that's how a particular sector of screen production is operating at a particular time, whether that's particular social issues or aspects of our society that are being represented on the screen at any given moment. So I think those universal principles that were in place in the 1930s are still in place now. But as you've alluded to, Rosie, and again, I think it would be clear from the video, applying that in the now is really hard because there's we're living in a world that is saturated by moving image content, and our resources as an archive haven't gone up in this period, by the way. They've actually gone down. So it is a challenge. But some of the ways that we try to do it is to our curators some of them are specialized in particular areas of filmmaking, and we'll keep a close eye on those particular fields. Some of the ways that they can do that is through contacts with filmmakers and practitioners in those fields, but also through things like festivals, award ceremonies, and also just kind of keeping atop of the field. But I would also say, one of the best ways to get something into the archive is for somebody to offer it to us. And a lot of the history of the archive over the course of the 20th century, the world of analog production, was that because physical cans of film, survived, in laboratories, in production companies, basements, etc., the time would come at which that material would it would become an issue for whoever had that material, that something needs to be done with it in the long run. And often at that point, people would turn to the BFI as the National Archive. This is a more challenging scenario in the digital era because we don't necessarily know where people's digits are going. And that's why digital collecting is so challenging. But I think a big part of what we have to do over the coming years and decades, and this event I think is a part of that, is to get the archiving message out there so that some of the right materials do get offered to us, as well as the things that we proactively seek. So that would be my general take on the question.
Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Patrick said. With TV, I mean, as with all digital media now, it's keeping track of the vast array of stuff that is out there. I mean, I still employ a really basic process to do this. I go through TV listings every week and I see what's coming on and I try to track it that way. And I do that for channels that we don't collect as well. So as I said in my video, we are lucky we have partnerships with public service broadcasters. We collect from those channels. There's lots of channels that we don't collect from. So cable, satellite, streamers, we don't collect from. I try to kind of keep a list to consider for any future offers or like future considerations, and hope that I'll be able to come back to that if those offers or partnerships ever happen, which would be great if they did. For the material that we do bring in, I consider lots of things: critical reception, audience reception. I think I tried to describe it in the video about the kind of cultural impact of things. It's quite difficult to quantify. I appreciate what Patrick was saying about the kind of the things which appear to be part of the furniture or media that you don't pay so much attention to. I try to strike a balance with that in my collecting. So there is TV that's very much of the moment, something like Dairy Girls, which Dylan mentioned, and then there's other documentaries which may not get talked about that I think are interesting, and I pick them up on that basis.
Okay, thank you. And Will?
Yeah, I think that question of impact is quite key, coming to the question of virtual reality, because actually, arguably, it's not a particularly impactful area yet in terms of the film world. It's still quite a rarefied experience. It still happens has to happen physically more often than not for its full experience to be enjoyed, and that tends to still be at film festivals that can be quite exclusive events. So compared to online film, for example, viral video or television, relatively small numbers of people are experiencing it. in terms of the pilot and how we applied what you were getting at in your question, in terms of what we selected, why those two projects, we wanted two very different projects. VR is like anything, it's got multiple genres within it. It isn't a genre really, it's a platform within which are contained multiple genres. So In the Eyes of the Animal is a really challenging project for us because it's a CGI experience. No, that experience is never really the same twice, depending on the user. The experience generates itself based on where you turn your head. It's developed inside a bespoke games engine. On and on I could go about why it's so complex. Notes to my father, the 360 documentary isn't as complex a proposition. It throws up some obstacles, but it's easier generally in terms of the way it's structured and the amount of files that have to be delivered in terms of storing it. So they're at either end of the spectrum in terms of complexity, but I think to a certain extent both can be understood within the longer history of moving image and filmmaking. And I think this is another thing that VR throws up, is that increasingly it's hard to split the Venn diagram of forms out, because VR is its own thing essentially, but it shares a lot with gaming, it shares a lot with theatre, it shares a lot with film, and the emphases of those different forms differ depending on the project in question. So I think the long list that I've been keeping of projects that I think would be interesting to approach for acquisition, they tend to either be projects that can be well understood within a longer history of moving image appreciation, rather than say a straight up game, for example, or they tend to be something that works, that speaks, is successful against the terms of the form. And what I mean by that is that you experience some VR projects and they don't, for me, and I don't know if this is experience of the audience, you sometimes think, that's great. Did it need to be in VR? What was it that the VR context did that lifted that experience? Other projects are absolutely fabulous inside that environment, and I couldn't imagine them anywhere else. Something like Common Ground, which is a couple of years old now, but was a really interesting synthesis of, actually in some cases, archive documentary, sort of spatial mapping and participation, or something like The Guardian's 6x9. And The Guardian were very front-footed in VR in the early days of it, and they created a brilliant piece about solitary confinement called 6x9, which absolutely had you wanting to tear the headset off by the end, which I felt a lot of the time anyway with different projects, but it worked in that sense because it was about claustrophobia and the horror of being contained. So, it's not easy to pinpoint exactly why a certain VR project might be higher up on the list as an acquisition proposition, but I think that question of form and function and creativity, and in the broader context of moving image, is the sort of matrix of decision making that we're trying to apply there.
Okay, thank you all. I think it raises so many more questions for me, to be honest, but in the interest of time, I'm probably going to skip most of those questions unless they come up again, and go to the chat. So we've got a question here, which is, across all of the areas of work and collections, what one piece of content produced in the last, oh no, that's gone, sorry. Okay, go on to the next one. If my film is currently on YouTube or Vimeo, how safe is it? Is it preserved for the future? So that's quite a big question. I don't know who wants to go for that one.
Shall I start? Colleagues will come in, but I think the two-word answer to that is nobody knows. YouTube and Vimeo, they are not constituted as archives. They don't claim to be archives. YouTube and Vimeo are publishing platforms which allow you as a user, and along with millions of other users, to distribute your content on their platform. They are very well resourced, and so probably certainly YouTube, like better resourced probably in terms of annual turnover than any national archive of any country, I would imagine. But they don't purport to be an archive or to preserve content as their primary function. And of course, a lot of content gets taken down from YouTube for one reason or another. So they do invest in vast kind of like server farms split across various parts of the globe. And I certainly don't think it's likely that if you have a video on YouTube right now, that it's going to be disappearing anytime soon. But there's no reason at all to put any more kind of definitional faith in YouTube or any other corporation to be there to preserve your content. So I think there will be a continuing role for dedicated archives for the future. But how the relationship between those dedicated archives and the public sector and the private sector and publishers and self-defined archives will play out over the coming years, there's a huge amount of variables in there, and we're very far from seeing how that will crystallize. But yeah, I think your content is safe for now, but don't think of your publisher as being your archive. That would be a category error, I would suggest.
Will?
I'd just come in off the back of that and say that even though it seems impossible to imagine, it's not inconceivable that YouTube will one day not be there. It will close. If the numbers don't add up for it anymore, it will close ultimately, either to be replaced by something else. At that point, we can foresee potentially a scenario whereby people who have uploaded their videos, maybe, you know, by that stage, decades early, will be offered a limited window to get their files back. Maybe they'll miss that window, maybe not. YouTube will close, and an enormous repository of moving image heritage will go. They don't think of it in heritage terms, but we do. The other thing to say is that YouTube exists in a political and regulatory climate, and that's an increasingly fraught climate between the government on the one hand and the online harms bill and its desire alongside other governments to bring big tech to heel, and a pushback from platforms like YouTube, who have said things like, you know, if we can't find a way forward with government around what they perceive to be censorship, that's YouTube, not the government, what YouTube perceives to be censorship potentially, maybe they'll cease to operate in the UK. That has been said. It's really hard to imagine, isn't it? But it's not impossible.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that at all? No? Okay. So the next question is, how do you make sure an array of diversity within the selected content is achieved? Would possibly a collaborative process which involves a diverse range of curatorial voices be the solution? And I know this is kind of a subject, you know, that is happening at the BFI at the minute, but if you guys could talk about that, that would be great.
I think my view is that you know, we definitely need to kind of strike a balance between the kind of expertise that we have amongst our curators, but yes, but by all means, I do think that actually we are looking at ways in which to kind of broaden out the kind of the way that we think about making sure that we do get as diverse a kind of range of materials being kind of thought about and prioritized for bringing in for acquisition and preservation. So yeah.
I mentioned in the video that you've all seen that we, in terms of lockdown video, that project has been predicated on getting the suggestions of the general public, and that's been incredibly useful because there's a very small number of us and there's a lot of the general public, and so they've brought a lot of films to our attention that we wouldn't have known about, and some of those we will be pursuing for acquisition. The only thing I would add is, you know, the nature of the curatorial workload. This might not be obvious. There's no reason why it should be obvious from the outside, but it's a constant kind of spinning of plates in the air kind of process, because we're constantly looking at material, constantly selecting material, constantly in negotiation with prospective donors and bringing things in and cataloging them. So we're always across multiple processes at all times. So we're not in a sort of you know, a leisurely position usually of being able to kind of survey the universe and say, I'll have that one and I'll have that one, and can I have that one, please? It's always a much more intense and complex kind of set of circumstances we're working in. But the thought behind the question is a very good one, and I think technology is getting us to a place where it's easier to start to do that kind of collaborative curation than it would have been really at any point within the last 80 years.
I think I'd just add that it's a internal question organisationally for the BFI, and also an external question in terms of the way we engage on particular projects. For example, the project that we engage with the Black Cultural Archives, who've offered to act as a critical friend around looking at how we might collect and represent the Black Lives Matter, the audiovisual sort of aspect of the Black Lives Matter story. You know, that's not something that's necessarily appropriate for the BFI to do on its own, given the makeup of its curatorial team. Likewise, the heritage sector in general and curatorial in general at the big organizations is too white, and it needs to be addressed. And you know, it looks like slow gains are being made, so hopefully over time that collaborative curation can happen, because the teams, the core teams, will be more reflective of the people and things that they're collecting, and also better engagement across the sector with institutions that have specific concerns or specific focuses.
Okay. Lisa, I was just wondering around that that same question, but with television. I mean, with off-air recording, does that help in that area? I don't quite know how to phrase that properly, but you know, would you say that that kind of picks up a lot of the diverse content that we would be looking to acquire without having to have such a intensive selection process?
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, it picks up what the broadcasters broadcast. So then there's our selection on top of that, which, I mean, I do consult with my fellow curators, but as Will says, we're not exactly a diverse bunch. But we, you know, it's absolutely a priority to improve inclusion in our selection and within our department. It is a question of how we do that. I mean, for TV selection, we did used to have a selection board kind of back in the 60s and 70s, where there were a group of industry people who would advise the archive on what to take. And you know, that's one way of thinking about it. It is a question of resource and how you consult with people, and how people are compensated for their time as well, if they're providing consultation to us.
Okay, thank you. So the next question, this is probably one for Dylan actually. How do I submit my film to the BFI National Archive?
So we do have a email address, curatorial inquiries at bfi.org.uk, where you can kind of submit information, and one of our curatorial archivists will have a look at your offer, and we'll consult with our curators, and we'll kind of take the conversation from there. When material comes into the collection, we do secure the donation of material, and we are reliant on donation of materials with an acquisition agreement, which kind of sets out the terms and conditions of the transfer of title, and the kind of a few permitted uses that we also ask for to help us with our kind of access and kind of outreach kind of ambitions as well. That's it in a nutshell. Or of course you can kind of talk to our esteemed colleagues in the curatorial department to kind of pick up the conversation too.
Okay, thank you. I hope that's helpful. So the next question is to Will, but also the others. Does this VR pilot project and changing landscape mean the BFI collecting policy should adapt in line to incorporate those essential 3D items, given that the BFI has collected 3D items in the past and today retains equipment stores for parts to maintain access to redundant formats? Yeah.
Yes, a good question. I think one of the things to note about the archive and what it's excellent at currently is large volumes of material, and its infrastructure is geared up towards dealing with large volumes of material, either that are digitized or that are analog, and the infrastructure to a certain extent is built around those. What I would say about where the BFI is at with regards to what I described as the wild garden, VR, gaming potentially, even AR, things that have a moving image component in which we might reasonably be interested, is that I think there's a strong instinct inside the BFI, and the strategy is still emerging, that this is definitely within our purview, that it has a strong relationship to film and TV and the art of the moving image as per our Royal Charter, that we want to get involved with, but that it's challenging. It throws up loads of challenges. And in the case of the archive specifically, we want our collections policy to be able to tackle this stuff, but we're really not there yet. We're right in the foothills of the journey of exploring these things. And like I said in my video, we're alongside loads of other institutions who are also there. No one has cracked this to the extent that they can commit to preserving and providing future access for these things. So I think until a lot more R&D has gone on, it'll be hard to adapt the collecting policy in the way that it would need to sort of fully commit to this stuff, which isn't to say that various pockets of activity might start to come on stream, but the collective policy has to be part of the broader BFI strategy around immersive and interactive, and that is still very much in a sort of thinking caps consultation phase, even though, like I said, instinctively we consider this stuff, or bits of it, to be part of screen-based narrative storytelling, heritage, etc., etc. So I'm sure we'll get there in the future, but I don't think we're quite ready to adapt our documentation yet.
Any other thoughts on that one?
I would just add that, you know, one of the things that we've been very, very good on in the past few years is thinking about what it means in terms of collecting and kind of acquisition, and understanding that obviously, you know, acquisition and collecting is not just the activity of materials coming through the front door, but it's also the strategy and the resources you have in place for making sure that the materials are cared for once you have brought them in, that they have a preservation plan set against them, and all of the kind of accompanying documentation and resources that implies. And I think we've got a lot better over the past few years of thinking about that. So collecting not just being the activity of coming through the front door, but actually everything that implies that it kind of comes after that.
Okay, yeah, that's obviously very important. So the next question is, it's probably quite a tough one to answer actually. Across all the areas of work and collections, what one piece of content produced in the last 12 months or so do you think is the most significant, or at least will be in many years to come? I guess maybe one for each of your areas, but I know that's probably a really tough one to answer, but if you have any thoughts, that would be good.
They're a fiend whoever asked that question, but props to you for asking such a tricky one. I think the one I might pick, it's a bit more than 12 months ago actually, because it dates to early in the pandemic. It was probably March last year, but I don't know if anybody remembers, there was a nurse who I think was in York, whose name was Dawn Bilborough, who posted a video which she filmed, I assume, on her phone in her car. And I think she posted it to Facebook and Instagram probably. And she had just come off a very, very long shift at her hospital. And she tried to do shopping at her local supermarket and found all the shelves to be bare. And so she posted this very, very heartfelt person to camera plea to people to not be selfish and to not hoard. And so it was a very, very simple thing. There was very little art in it, but I think it absolutely symbolized the power of moving image today, which as a result of digital has been so democratized, and it went viral, not just online, but you know, it got taken up by BBC, ITN, etc., and across the mainstream media. And now, you know, we're now in at the end of July 21, and I think that piece from probably March or April 2019, you know, absolutely sums up that moment and sums up the power of moving image to capture a moment and to capture a person's point of view. So even though it's a very modest film in a way, I think that's the one that I would pick.
Okay.
I'm going to also go back more than 1 year, if that's okay, slightly, just because the pandemic has slightly taken the acquisition wind out of our sails for obvious reasons. And I'm also going to cheat and choose two things. And they're just two of the things that I've been most excited about getting into the collection. One is a trilogy of short films short film music video narratives called Shiro's Story, the Shiro's Story trilogy, made by a South London rapper called Rapman. And why I was so excited about it is because they went absolutely crazy online to the extent that they caught the attention of the mainstream industry and ended up landing him a feature film deal with Paramount that was called Blue Story, and then did big business, huge business actually, for a debut British independent feature. And for me, it absolutely tells a similar story about the power of online and the way in which those power dynamics are shifting, particularly in terms of representation, and for people who might have felt historically shut out of the film industry, who are now able to sort of make a grab and develop an audience online, build a community, improve an audience, and then go full circle by being sort of poached back into the mainstream industry. So I thought that was a really interesting set of videos. And the second, just quickly, we acquired some deep fakes, which, and I think I'm going to put my neck out here and say we were the first national archive to bring some deep fakes in, although I think the V&A have some from a design perspective. And they were deep fakes that were actually created deliberately to show to advertise the perils of deep fakes. So they weren't true sort of rebel deep fakes that we found online, but we engaged with the artist who made them, an artist who goes by the name of Bill Posters, and they're deep fakes of Donald Trump and Kim Kardashian and Freddie Mercury and various others. And they just, that for me was a really interesting technological story, because I think, you know, whereas the Rapman trilogy was a sort of social industrial story, this was a really interesting technological story. And I feel proud that the archive is able to tell all those different stories about the way in which, you know, moving images evolving formally, but also culturally and socially.
Okay, Lisa, do you have a favourite?
As I'm a television curator, I get to cheat and pick a series, which I think is fine. I am going to pretend we're not in a pandemic for a second and say the BBC, Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You, which came out just around a year ago. And I just think it's an astonishing piece of work that really, I think is gonna change how things are commissioned and how creators are viewed in British television, I think, for a long time to come. Just such an interesting, remarkable series that managed to weave in so many different themes that I think will still be relevant and resonant for many, many years to come.
Okay, thank you. And Dylan?
I'm going to really dodge the question here and say, of course, it's, and I can kind of anticipate some actual and virtual eye rolls here as I just kind of make clear, you know, obviously my responsibility is to listen to exactly the three kinds of recommendations that we've just heard, and, you know, absolutely support all three of them and make sure that the resources and what have you are in place so that we can collect and preserve everything that we've just heard from in the best way possible and in the appropriate way for each item there. But also kind of way much more on that. And of course, the whole idea of the BFI National Archive is that it is broad and it is kind of inclusive and is kind of bringing in as much as materials aside from the favorites, kind of one or two in any given 1 year. So I'll hold my hands up and say that's a complete dodge of the question, but there you go.
Okay, no, that's fine. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm sorry to not be able to answer all the questions, but I'd like to thank our panelists for contributing towards the video, which is really interesting and really informative, and again for expanding on that here in this Q&A. So thank you very much, and yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Thank you.